It started with locked shop shutters and spiraled into a national rupture. In late December 2025, Iran wasn't just facing a collapsing currency, it was facing collapsing patience. The Iranian Rial hit an almost unbelievable low, 1.42 million to the US dollar on the open market, losing nearly 50% of its value in 2025 alone. Inflation officially stood at 42.5%, but grocery receipts told a harsher story. Food costs surged 72% year-on-year, squeezing households into impossible choices. What began as a shopkeeper strike in Tehran's grand bazaars soon pulled in students, laborers, and provincial towns. This wasn't ideological outrage at first. It was economic exhaustion. And as the unrest spread, a chilling question lingered in the air. How long before the streets burn hotter than the economy itself? The answer came quickly and violently. In Lorestan province, protesters stormed a police station, clashed with officers, and torched vehicles. 3 deaths and 17 injuries were confirmed by semi-official sources, but this was only the beginning. In Lordegan, Chahamahal, and Bakhtiari province, confrontations escalated into gunfire, involving security forces and what authorities called armed individuals. The death toll rose to at least 6, including Amir Hossam Kodayari Fard, a Basij member tied to the Revolutionary Guards. His death sparked confusion. Was he enforcing state order or caught up in the chaos? Meanwhile, in Isfahan, another protester was shot dead. Each death shifted the narrative, from strikes about prices to funerals about power. By now, the protests were no longer localized, they were contagious. Southern cities like Mardasht in Fars province echoed anti-establishment chants. In Zahedan, a city long simmering with Baluch minority grievances, slogans turned sharper, louder, and unmistakably political. At least 29 arrests were reported by rights organizations, mostly in western regions, many involving the Kurdish community. State media alleged arrests in Kermanshah for producing incendiary devices, suggesting authorities were preparing for a longer storm. Yet, despite the crackdowns, the real fuel for these protests wasn't homemade firebombs. It was systemic economic suffocation. Iran's economy in 2025 resembled a battlefield long before the protests erupted. Western sanctions, toughened after the US exit from the 2015 nuclear accord in 2018, had already strangled oil exports and foreign financing. Then came the June 2025 conflict with Israel. On June 13th, Israeli jets struck nuclear and missile infrastructure. On June 22nd, the United States followed with airstrikes targeting enrichment facilities at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. The war lasted 12 days, but the economic aftershock lasted far longer. The Rial's descent from 430,000 per dollar in 2022 to 1.4 million by late 2025 wasn't just depreciation, it was humiliation. And now that humiliation had turned inward, from geopolitical adversaries to domestic accountability. President Masoud Pezeshkian tried to plug the cracks before they became craters. His tone was calmer than his country. He publicly accepted responsibility for economic missteps, admitting that liberalizing currency controls meant to help markets breathe ended up choking them instead. Officials promised talks with merchant and trade union representatives, signaling outreach but offering few specifics. Meanwhile, conservatives backed the right to protest over inflation but warned of external exploitation. Then came a strategic masterstroke of crowd control, a midweek national holiday, officially due to weather, unofficially due to logistics, quieting movement without deploying a single bullet. But bullets were already deployed elsewhere. The Basij, a paramilitary volunteer force loyal to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, stepped into protest zones to enforce order. To many young Iranians, this brought back memories of Mahsa Amini's death in 2022, which triggered the largest protest wave in decades. Back then, hundreds were killed and cities shut down for months. The difference now? In 2022, the protests began with a woman's tragedy. In 2025, they began with a nation's bankruptcy. Yet both carried the same undercurrent: a system that reacts to dissent with force first and reflection later, if at all. Reflection is not a luxury when foreign powers are tweeting warnings. US President Donald Trump, after talks with Israeli leadership, posted online that American forces were ready to support protesters if lethal force is used against peaceful crowds. No policy papers, no strategic communiques, just a public red line. Iran answered not with diplomacy, but deterrence. Advisor Ali Larijani warned that interference could trigger regional spillover, threatening American interests by proxy. The message was clear. Iran may be economically weakened, but its network of alliances and asymmetric leverage is still intact and dangerous when cornered. What made these protests different was the battlefield of information. Footage from cities showed damaged public facilities, burning vehicles, and crowds marching through smoke-filled intersections. In Zahedan, chants weren't just complaints, they were verdicts calling for accountability at the highest levels. And for the first time, robots weren't the story, algorithms were. Young Iranians weaponized VPNs, encrypted messaging, and decentralized digital coordination to outmaneuver state firewalls. The government didn't just lose control of the Rial, it temporarily lost control of the narrative too. And narratives shape legitimacy faster than currencies crash. Let's talk about the unsung actors in this uprising, the merchants. Iran's bazaars are more than markets, they are economic parliaments. Historically, they helped topple monarchs, influence revolutions, and pressure governments through coordinated strikes. Their participation here wasn't accidental, it was structural. When the Rial collapses, merchants collapse with it first. And once merchants strike, the rest of society listens. The bazaars shutting down in 2025 carried echoes of 1979, when market strikes amplified dissent into revolution. Today's strikes may not carry the same scale, but they carry the same DNA: organized economic resistance as a precursor to political disruption. Now zoom out even further. The Horn of Africa and the Middle East are watching closely because instability in Iran rarely stays inside Iran. If the protests escalate, energy markets, Red Sea security, and regional alliances could feel secondary tremors. Iran's support for groups across the Middle East, from political factions to militant proxies, means any internal crisis risks external realignment. If dialogue fails and crackdowns deepen, foreign powers may reconsider diplomatic bets. If dialogue succeeds, Iran may claim reform without regime retreat. But if neither happens fast enough, the real test begins. Can a 6.2 million protester memory nation survive a 6.2 million shop receipt rebellion without rewriting its social contract? Iran is juggling three pressures at once: sanctions that drain national revenue, inflation that drains household morale, and now protests that drain institutional authority. So where does this end? Either the leadership turns dialogue into reform, or funerals into momentum. Either the economy gets a rescue plan, or the streets get a rebellion cycle. If Iran can't stabilize its economy, can it stabilize its authority? Or will the real border patrol soon be between the state and its own citizens? So where does this end? Either the leadership turns dialogue into reform, or funerals into momentum. Either the economy gets a rescue plan, or the streets get a rebellion cycle. The next chapter isn't about exchange rates, it's about endurance. If Iran can't stabilize its economy, can it stabilize its authority? Or will the real border patrol soon be between the state and its own citizens?